So I tried to come up with, last week we had a song from Michael Card's album about Revelation and about the dragon, and I tried to think what song could I possibly find that would match Michael Card singing about the dragon of Revelation, and then realized Michael Card has actually written 2 songs about the dragon of Revelation, and that solved that problem nicely. Good morning! Welcome back to week 21 of our comparative study of Revelation. Here we go. So this week we have a delightful topic. This week we are looking at what is sometimes called the unholy Trinity. We have a little bit of cleanup to finish first before we press on into chapter 13. So let's finish up our discussion of chapter 12, which was, of course, the dragon. Right? Now you remember the setting we had last time around. We have this dragon. There is no ambiguity as to our identity here, right? John says very clearly he is that serpent of old, the devil, right? No ambiguity, no questions. The dragon lurks before the woman, waiting to devour her child as it's born. And we said the symbology of the woman, this idea of her being clothed with the sun with 12 stars around her head, that's meant to evoke what to us? What should that call to mind? Israel, right? This is the language that is used of Jacob's vision of the sun and the moon and the 12 stars bowing down to him, right? Whether this is actual national Israel or this is something like the church as representatives of Israel, as the fulfillment of Israel, there's questions there, right? We looked at some arguments for that on both sides, but either way, we see this as, in some sense, the people of God. Christ is born. The dragon waits to devour Christ, but he is caught up away to his Father's throne, and the woman flees into the desert, escaping the dragon for a time, times, and half a time. The dragon, his plots foiled, is left behind, filled with fury, for his time, we are told, is brief. Now, I want to just pause and recap from the past few weeks our new favorite time period of 3.5 years, 42 months, time times half a time, 1,260 days. We're not going to try to count it off in hours, but you get the idea, right? However we want to measure that, we have now seen a bunch of events described as lasting for this period, and this chapter is going to be one of the last of those. And so we've seen, for instance, in Daniel 7, we had this prophecy of a little horn that would speak against the people of God, that would try to overthrow and to destroy them. We are told that his persecution would last for this period. He, that is the little horn, shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times half a time. Again in Daniel 9, there's a figure, this horn that springs off of the goat, right? This horn that is described to us, that we're told that again he will bring an end to sacrifice and offering. He shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate. Again in Daniel chapter 12, there's a vision that he has of these 2 men standing beside the stream, and someone asks one of them, how long will it be till the end of all these wonders that have just been described? And I heard the man clothed in linen, he raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and when the shattering of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. So we're catching some themes there, right? That there is an oppression of the people of God, it lasts for this period of 3.5 years, and then it comes to an end. Revelation 11 has now echoed that period as well. We saw a couple of weeks ago the 2 witnesses, and that the ministry of the 2 witnesses is described as lasting for 42 months, that same time period. We saw the trampling of the temple, that the inner courts of the temple are measured off and are kept safe, but the outer courts are given over to the Gentiles, and that the nations may trample upon them. Right? We saw maybe that's the literal temple. Maybe we read that more symbolically as saying, you know, the outer physical trappings of the people of God. Our bodies, our things, our lives, our possessions, these things may be lost, but there is an inner core, right? There's your heart, your true devotion to God is preserved with God and is measured off and known. However we read that, John here is clearly referencing back in the book to these references from Daniel to these same time periods. Now at last we come to another of those. As the woman flees into the wilderness, we are told that there is a place there prepared for her by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days, that she flees to the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, times, and half a time. And so we have this echoing of this period. Now look, my inclination, I think I've said this to you in the past, my inclination is when John keeps saying this in different ways that all add up to the same time period, that feels to me like a natural reading here is to say this is a literal time period, right? You can look at 42 and say 42 has significance. It's Elijah stopping the rain, we're told, is for 42 months. The stoppings of the children of Israel in the wilderness as they're going to the promised land, they stop 42 times. They spend 42 years wandering in the wilderness before they're let into the promised land. All these are significant 42s, but 1,260 is not really significant, if anything, right? And so even the commentators I found who are more on the amillennial side said, you know, we're not really sure why John describes it in terms of number of days, unless it's another way of saying the same period of time. It's just an odd way for him to keep emphasizing different numbers that add up to this same period. Either way, though, we have what seem to be references to this same period, right? A period in which there are descriptions both of persecution, right, both of oppression of the people of God, but also where there is not a complete overthrow of them. And so I want to give just three basic ways of understanding of these descriptions of the period of 42 months that have shown up in all these different passages. Three common ways of understanding them that are held by different views, different adherents of views of Revelation. So let's look first to the postmillennial view. Remember, postmillennialism has as its key idea what we called preterism, the idea that the events of Revelation are mostly satisfied by AD 70, by the fall of Jerusalem. That's the end of the age, and we live now in the next age. In this view, those 42 months are mostly about Nero's war against Jerusalem. From the period where the war begins, which is in early AD 66, to the fall of Jerusalem, which is in late AD 70, it is just about bang on 42 months. And so if you want to count off a time period of 3.5 years, that one works pretty well. 3.5 years of the war before the fall of Jerusalem. Now the war continues after that, but if you mark the siege of Jerusalem, the fall of Jerusalem as kind of the key moment of the overthrowing of the old system, right? The final destruction of the temple, right? That's never been rebuilt since. If you want to mark that as your ending point, then that's just about dead on 42 months. How do we interpret that the temple is trampled by the nations for 42 months? Well, after 42 months, the actual temple is actually trampled by the actual nations, right? And so the postmillennial says that's the fulfillment here. The trampling is finally a literal one after this progressive defeat of Israel over the months and years behind. Perhaps the preservation of the inner court is something like the true church fleeing out of the ruins of the temple, right? As Christ, in this view, when Christ says in Matthew 24, flee to the mountains when you see these things about to happen, maybe that's the church leaving Jerusalem, fleeing from the incoming invasion, and following Christ's words, seeing what's about to take place. What about the two witnesses that prophesy for 42 months? Next question, please, right? This is the one that postmillennialism struggles with more. While you will find particular postmillennials who will give a particular answer, there's not a lot of general consensus within the movement that I could find as to who the two witnesses are or what their 42 months of witness are. So this one I think really strong, right? I think that one fits really well. This one, kind of middling. It's not 42 months of trampling on the temple exactly, but you can kind of see it connect. This one, I think, is their weaker point, right? Then the flight of the woman. The flight of the woman is, again, the church escaping from the destruction of the old system, right? That the church flees out of Jerusalem, escapes the Jewish rebellion, goes out into the nations, goes out into other places, gets away from the fall of the old Jewish system here, as it is utterly unmade in judgment for the rejection of Israel's Messiah. That's the postmillennial view, or at least in its broad strokes. What about the amillennial view? Well, the strength of the amillennial view is also the thing that drives me a little bit crazy about it, all right? The strength of the amillennial view is the absolute simplicity and clarity of its message. And its message is, remember, amillennialism says all the reign of Christ descriptions that we see in Revelation are the heavenly reign of Christ before his final return, right? So the millennium is Christ reigning in heaven right now. All the prophecies of war and victory and struggle, and all these should be understood primarily in the context of beating us over the head with the same message over and over again to make sure we get it. And the message is, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world, right? The message is, you are the people of the Lamb triumphed by his death, you are going to triumph by your death as well, right? Stand firm even unto death. As you know, as he speaks to the churches in the very beginning and says, some of you have resisted now unto the point of death, right? That is John's message over and over again. The world will be against you, but through your death you triumph with Christ, right? And everything else is a reiteration and a recapitulation of that message to the church again and again and again. So, in this view, we are right now in the 42 months, as indeed we have been since the resurrection of Christ, right? What is it when the temple is trampled underfoot? That is the church suffering, dying, but being preserved with Christ. Who are the two witnesses who prophesy and then are killed and then are raised? That is the church suffering, dying, but being preserved with Christ. What is the flight of the woman into the wilderness? Are you catching a pattern here? That is the church suffering, dying, but preserved with Christ. Do you see it? Right? In this view, all the metaphors collapse into the same thing. They are just different ways of emphasizing that same message. Does that make sense? Okay, that's two. Yeah.
So
Alan.
The 42 months really have no meaning.
Okay, so in an amillennial view, you will sometimes see amillennials argue that some of the 42-month references are something like the reign of, or the ministry of Christ. That Christ ministers for 42 months, and maybe that's half of the year is a literal 42 months, and then the other half of the 7 years is figurative, right? Some amillennials will go a little closer to a postmillennial view, and will say there's a connection here with the siege and fall of Jerusalem, that in some sense that's a 42 months that's fulfillment of some of these prophecies. Some of them will emphasize just more the symbolic character of the number 42, right? Again, pointing to 42 trials and 42 stations in the wilderness that the children of Israel stop as they're wandering. 42 months of Elijah shutting the heavens and the rain not falling. And they will say 42, when it shows up in Scripture, 42 is a time of trial and purification and making ready to enter into something better. That's what 42 is over and over again. That's what 42 is here. Again, if I put my personal spin here, I want to say, then what's 1,260, right? Why have it in days alongside that? But I think they would say, it's just another way of expressing 42 months, right? It's another way of summarizing and recapitulating that same number. Is that catching what you're asking me? Yeah, good. Scott?
Which, if you were, to be as fair as we can to that way of looking at it, repeating something saying the same thing in two different ways is the common poetic form throughout Hebrew literature and throughout all the Old Testament. It's just it would be you could say it's a common thing to say the same thing and use two different ways of saying.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Scott. Anybody else where we are? So a post-mill view, an a-mill view. The pre-mill view then tends to see these as literal and future, right? If you're going to look at Daniel and say, Daniel's got a 70th week, a 7-year period that we're still waiting for, cool, 42 months is half of that 7-year period, right? It is a literal half of the week of years. What is the trampling of the temple? It is a future trampling of a future temple. This requires a rebuilding of the temple, right? But most premillennial views will say we're awaiting then some future rebuilding. Who are the two witnesses? They are two literal future figures, right? They are two probably individuals, whether that's something like Moses and Elijah or just two people whose names we don't yet know. Most premillennial views are going to hold to something like two individuals as fulfillment of that. What is the flight of the woman? Well, if the woman here is the people of God or is the Jewish people or something like that, then the flight of the woman is the church in hiding in a time of persecution, right? The little horn is trampling on them. He is trampling the temple. He is trampling over, he's ending the sacrifices and the holy days, and this is the people of God in flight, in hiding from that. Those are going to be the three major categories of understanding of this passage, or of these periods, let's say. I'm going to pause for breath there. Does anybody have a question where we are? Anybody else where we are? Eric?
Sort of two questions. If in the premillennial view, the flight of the woman is Israel, is that like a literal exodus of the Jews out of Israel?
Okay, so is this actually the Jews go into hiding in the wilderness somewhere out of the nation of Israel? Again, it's really going to depend on how you read a bunch of the passages that tie in with this, right? So one of the 42-month prophecies is that the little horn will confirm a covenant with many for 42 months, right? Or the prince who is to come will confirm a covenant with 42 months. We saw that back in Daniel, right? Now, we saw a lot of ambiguity around that passage. Some people will say that the prince who is to come is Christ. The covenant confirmed with many is salvation, that we are partakers in that covenant now, right? But a premillennial view will usually say that's the Antichrist, or it's a prefigurement of the Antichrist, confirming an evil covenant with many, right? Making some kind of bargain of worship, maybe with many of the Jews who are unrepentant, with the nations, right? And so this could be something like the true Israel, right? The believing Jews, whatever you want to say there, perhaps in literal physical flight, either into a literal wilderness, right, or figuratively into the wilderness, into hiding, into a place of escape. Some have gotten very specific with this. There's a whole strand of premillennialism that says that they're going to go to the desert city of Petra, right? It's the one, if you've seen Indiana Jones and not the Temple of Doom, the Last Crusade. Thank you. You've seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It's the city carved into the rock that they ride back into there. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, not least because it seems like if they all went and hid at Petra, that the Antichrist could just be like, well, a bunch of people on these blogs said that's where they were going to go. I'm going to look at, right? Like, seems like the cat's kind of out of the bag if that's the plan. And just there's nothing to suggest it, right? Like, I don't see anything in the passage that says that's in detail what's going to happen. But that is a strain of premillennialism says, very specifically, that's the wilderness they're going to flee to. Am I answering you?
Obviously, I have read that somewhere.
Yeah, it's a very common perspective. I don't see that there's a lot of grounding in the passage to say that's what's going to happen here, but it is a very common perspective. Anybody else?
I just have a little trouble in the fact that we are trying to point, that sometimes in this, people are trying to point out this is how it's going to be when
Well, that is kind of the thesis of this class, right? Is we don't really know. But variations on these would at least be common guesses that people would make, right? You could certainly say, I think all the guesses have got it wrong, and it's just a mystery for the time being. But that still seems to point to something future there if we say it's a mystery, right?
Right. I don't have any trouble with it. Just sometimes when people go to the extreme and say, this is what happened to this, and you know it can't necessarily be unless.
One of the things as we push forward is there's a passage I'm going to quote from Irenaeus next week or in 2 weeks, where one of the cautions that Irenaeus gives is he says, some of y'all are way too concerned with figuring out the exact names and details of who these things apply to, and you need to knock it off. It's not helping. Irenaeus writes this about the year 130 AD, and it's kind of nice to see that not a lot has changed since then. Okay, back to chapter 12. Now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels thrown down with him. Right? Michael Card in his song says of this, one of my favorite lines in his songs, and so the battle raged between the heavens and the skies. Right? I think that's just a great piece of poetry there, albeit not from the original passage. When is this is the key question, right? We know that this passage, chapter 12, is jumping around in time. Remember, it jumps back to the woman was about to give birth and she gave birth to Christ, right? This is, in some sense, this is past, and then in the space of one verse, we get the whole life of Christ and his death and resurrection, and he's caught up to heaven with God, right? All that happens in the space of a verse. We are playing around with time here unmistakably in this passage. And so the question is, when is this war against the dragon, Michael and his angels fighting here? Well, a possible answer is to go to Luke 10. Remember, Christ sends out his 72 followers here in pairs, sending them all through the tribes of Israel, and they come back overjoyed, reporting the things that they have seen. Even the demons are subject to us in your name, they say. And he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall hurt you. We've seen some indication that John may be referencing this passage elsewhere in the book. Think of the monstrous figures, the demonic figures he describes with tails like serpents, with poison like scorpions, right? That there is there's a parallel here that he may be referencing back to Christ's words spoken and recorded for us in Luke 10. So this may be another reference to the same thing. I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Another parallel passage here comes to us from Daniel 12, right? So Daniel 12, the last chapter of Daniel, one of the things that Daniel records is, at that time, so this is a word being given to Daniel, at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And then we go into that passage we quoted a few minutes ago. How long shall it be to the end of the wonders? For a time, times, and half a time. Right? And so clearly some parallel connection here. This is the only clear reference to Michael in the Old Testament. This is one of about 2 references to Michael in the New Testament. Clearly, John anticipates a connection between these 2 passages being seen, right? And so is this a future event? Is this future, the fall of Satan, being described in some final struggle with Michael? Is this past, more connected to Luke 10, to the ministry or the resurrection of Christ? There's difficulty there. There is difficulty. Can I be a little bit fun this morning? There is difficulty just in the identity of who Michael the archangel is. Because you read this, I read this was a few weeks ago when I was studying Daniel, At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince of your people. And I thought, at that time shall arise an angel? That feels like a weird thing to say. I mean, I would expect at that time will arise Christ, right? Right? Doesn't that seem like it fits better here? There is a major strain of historic Christianity that says that Michael the archangel is an Old Testament way of describing Jesus Christ. Right? Then Christ and his angels fought against the dragon, right? At that time shall arise Christ, the great prince in charge of your people, the anointed one, the prince, as Daniel has said earlier. I don't know if I buy this, but Charles Spurgeon did. And when Charles Spurgeon and Charles Wesley both hold to a perspective, I got to at least scratch my chin a little bit and go, huh, right? Historically, in the 1800s, this is a very common perspective, is that Michael is another way of referring to Christ. So let's just add, that one's bonus, right? That doesn't really change our reading of Revelation a whole lot, right? But just if you want a little bit extra of a question to chew on, there you go. Everybody good? All right. Three major views here for the fall of Satan then. One is that this is historic. The historic view usually says either this is happening pretty literally in Luke 10, right? As Christ says, I saw Satan fall from heaven, it's happening right then, or it is happening progressively culminating in Christ's death and resurrection. That is the ultimate triumph over the devil, the point at which he can no longer accuse the people of God, right? Because that is clearly the implication here in Revelation. He's fighting against the dragon. We've just been told the dragon is... Well, yes, thank you. I've lost my passage altogether here. We've just been told that one of the functions, there it is, that ancient serpent, the deceiver of the world, right? Satan as the accuser, right? If we want to translate there, right? He's the one who accuses, he's the enemy. That the accuser no longer has a place in heaven. When could that be but the resurrection of Christ? That no longer can there be any accusation against the people of God. Others will point here and will say this is a future fulfillment, that we are at something like the midpoint of the tribulation. There is a final casting down of the devil, a final hurling of him to earth for this brief 3.5 years of rage. Others see this as kind of a both and, right? That this is a passage that has both a historic fulfillment and a more final one. Either way, I will agree with my amillennial brothers, at least on this point, we should not lose the central theme of the passage here, right? And the central theme is this: I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power of the kingdom of God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before God, right? The accuser of the brethren is hurled from heaven. There is no longer any place for him. You know, when Paul in Romans can say, you know, who is it that accuses? No one, right? That there is no accusation left to be made. They have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, for the devil has gone down to you in great wrath, for he knows his time is short. Did I see a hand?
It sounds like he was cast on heaven twice, because he's on the earth now.
So,
Accusing people that I don't understand that.
okay, so, right, so we're told that Satan is the prince of the power of the air, right? That this world is in some ways his domain in the present now. I think we could look at this and we could say, you know, the question is, what is the devil's relation to heaven now, right? Not what is his relation to the earth now, that we can kind of answer that one. But what is his relation to heaven currently, right? We think sometimes of the story of Job, right? Where the devil is there in the courts of God, makes accusation against Job, right? That access maybe is what's in picture here, is what's in view, that no longer will he stand there and say, well, just smite him a little bit, and then you'll see that he'll curse you, right? That appearance before God, that's lost. Whether that's lost already or still yet to be lost, that's kind of the question of how you want to read this, right? I feel like I'm not in any way answering you and just talking at you. But you're right. That's the challenge. We have Jesus saying it has happened.
Well, I like yes or no answers.
Oh, you're in the wrong class. Come to a programming class I teach sometime. I give lots of yes/no answers there. This is the wrong class for that. Alan.
This is actually the part of Revelation I struggle the most with, because I don't understand. Like, if you look at Revelation, it's God's judgment on man. You know, why does there need to be a war in heaven? God is all powerful, right? Why do angels need to fight and have war with Satan when God could just? He wouldn't even have to speak. He could just say, "Boo, you're done. You're out of here." I don't understand why there needs to be a war.
Okay, why does there need to be a war given that God is all-powerful, right? And we're certainly going to see in the final judgment, right? The final judgment, right? One we all agree is the end. The description is given over and over again that Christ overcomes just by the breath of his mouth, right? We see this in Daniel, that there's a breath of God that destroys the little horn that's raised himself up against him. We see him in the Battle of Armageddon, right? In these passages we're going to come to, when God finally shuts the book, we don't get any description of a great and glorious campaign. God just kind of says, all right, that's done, and it's done, right? Why does it not play out like that here? I think that's a question we have to tie back even to things like, why does God have angels, right? Why does God have us as ministers of the gospel? It's not like he needs the help, right? But these are the ways he's chosen to show the outworkings of his power in time and in creation, is to say, to share it with his creations and to have them be a part of his outworking. There's a mystery there, I think, but I think that is his, we see that in his plan through history, that there are things he could do better without involving us that he chooses to involve us in nonetheless. Angela.
Would this kind of relate to the fact that maybe he's giving Israel another chance and he's having mercy on Israel?
Okay, so definitely the judgments we see, even in the judgment, that there's an idea that judgments are in part a chance for the nations to repent, right? That God brings judgment on people, yes, in punishment, but also as a way of saying, now stop it, right? Come back to me, turn away from the wicked things you're doing here. I think certainly there's an idea there that the slowness of these events playing out is in some ways a part of God's mercy, right? Again, going to Romans, what if God, choosing to bear with patience vessels destined for destruction, right? To show his mercy to them. I don't think we can get an absolute answer of why is God choosing to work through means, but it is his overwhelming pattern in history, right? It is why we're all here in the first place, is God continues to work through us as means.
Everything else seems to be dealing with people, right? But this is just Satan and angels, and I don't understand why there has to be that conflict in heaven.
Well, again, we see that in Daniel, though, right? Daniel prays for a word. He prays for a revelation as to, are the people going to go back to Israel the way that Jeremiah has prophesied, right? And he spends, I don't remember if it's a week or how long it is, but he spends this extended period in prayer. And finally, Gabriel, I think, comes to him and says, hey, listen, I left to bring you a message as soon as you started praying, but for a week now, the Prince of Persia has resisted me, right? And I have been in battle with the Prince of Persia. And not until Michael, the great chief of your people, came to assist me was I able to get away from that battle and to come to you to deliver the message, right? And so, look, all we get are glimpses, right? Like the curtain raises 1 inch and then it comes back down again. but there is a consistent pattern there, right? There is consistency in the way that's described to us. Eric.
A minute ago you mentioned Romans, and I think it's like Romans chapter 11. I don't know the verse for sure, but it talks about the partial hardening of the hearts of Israel.
Yes. Israel has been hardened in part in order that the Gentiles might be brought in and that they're ultimately all Israel will be saved, right?
Are we now to about the point where that hardening is about to end?
In the book.
Yes, in Revelations. Is that?
So if you read, let's say, the 144,000 sealed as being literal people of Israel, right? Literal 12,000 from each of the literal 12,000 tribes, that seems like in that reading that this is a fulfillment of the prophecy that Paul is making there. If you read it otherwise, then obviously it's not as clearly tied together there. But that's one of the arguments for a literal reading of the 144,000, is to say this is an answering and echoing of Paul's promise that there would be great conversion within the nation of Israel.
It's kind of already started or taken place before this.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. The end of chapter 12 then, the dragon became furious with the woman, went off to make war on the rest of her offspring. That, I think, is us. On those who keep the commands of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. That, I think, is right. Like, this part seems pretty clear, at least where the church falls, at least in part here. And he, that is the dragon, stood on the sand of the sea. Remember, we've talked about the sea is a bad place in Revelation, right? The sea is the place of chaos, of where the land is the place for God's people. The sea is a bad place. Bad things come out of the sea. You know, the dragon, this Leviathan, is in some ways a creature of the sea. He breathes water, right? And we see again now he comes back to the sea for his last scheme. And with 15 minutes left, we're going to start chapter 13. Here we go. Let's do it. And I saw a beast rising up out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given to it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with a sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast rising up out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. There will be no debate as to the meaning of this chapter. I have good news, right? This one's going to be perfectly clear and agreed upon by all Christians through history. Here we go. Before we go any further, I want you to see in this chapter the parody. Look at the details of what we've just read. What do you see here that is parody of the things of God? Okay, good. Let's start with this. We have a beast. The beast is worshipped. Why is he worshipped? Because he has a mortal wound and then has come back to life from his mortal wound. Or at least the passage says he seems to have a mortal wound, right? There's a kind of uncertainty, a kind of deception even in that. He seems to have been given a mortal wound and then raised back from it. In parody of the one who is given a mortal wound and then is raised from the dead, right? What else do you see? Other parallels?
There's a giving of authority, kind of like God the Father says, worship the Son. There's kind of that pass down, and then there's like this little weirdo Trinity thing going on.
Okay, good. So we called this week the unholy Trinity. Here we have three figures. We have a kind of demonic father, the dragon, and the dragon giving his authority to the beast from the sea, right? Giving his authority down to this monstrous creature that's risen up, giving him his throne and his authority and his power so that he can be worshipped alongside the beast. Good. Do you see any others?
Sort of a false prophet sort of figure, like I guess you can compare him to maybe John.
Okay.
Or something like that. That is kind of heralding the beast.
Okay, good. The final member of our false trinity, right? This false prophet, right? Who speaks just as the beast has the authority of the dragon, the prophet has the authority of the beast. He causes people to worship the beast, right? He's in this prophetic role. He's leading people toward the beast here. By the way, what is the first description we have of the false prophet? He looks like a what? A lamb. He has horns like a lamb, right? Just as we've already seen a lamb with 7 horns standing as if slain, now we see a beast with 2 horns in mimicry of the lamb who was slain, and yet a beast who speaks not like a lamb, but who speaks like a dragon. Yeah? All through here, then, we have descriptions of things that are references back to ideas we've seen before. By the way, one more, don't miss that at the end. We focus on, often in Revelation, one of the most famous images is the idea of the mark of the beast. But is this the first mark we've seen in the book? Where have we seen a mark before? The 144,000, we are told, are marked. They have the name of Christ, right? They have got, there's some evidence this may be a reference to the Old Testament high priest being marked on his forehead, "Holy is the Lord," right? They are sealed on their foreheads as being marked and protected by God. Now we see likewise, in parody of that, the devil marking his own, not with an eternal blessing, right? An eternal safeguard, but with a temporal thing that they can't buy or sell, right? He has no authority in heaven. All he can do is deny authority on earth here. Look, when I read this passage, there's this bit in, so we're reading The Lord of the Rings again, because of course we are, right? There's this bit in The Lord of the Rings where they talk about how all the evil things in Middle-earth are just parodic imitations of the good things, right? The orcs, little monster creatures, are twisted versions of the elves. The trolls are twisted version of the ents, the tree people, right? That's what comes to my mind when I read this passage. Everything the dragon does, none of it's new, none of it's original. It's all just parody of what the Lamb has done before. Does that make sense? Okay, all right. So we begin with a beast from the sea. By the way, just while we're grabbing references here, if I told you I was reading a book, and in the book there were two beasts described, and one of them was some kind of monster out of the land, right, that had maybe horns, and it was ferocious, and it had a mouth like a dragon, and another one was a beast from the sea, and it was some kind of serpent. What book would I be describing? Revelation, right? What other book has a fierce beast from the land and a fierce beast from the sea? Job, right? One of the references here seems to be to Behemoth and Leviathan, right? These primordial monsters that in Job have been snared and cast down by God, that here we have something like Behemoth and Leviathan rising again. Anyway, the beast from the sea. So the sea sometimes, we've said it's a place of chaos, a place of destruction, a place of world politics sometimes has a connection with the sea. This beast comes up out of this. He has heads, horns, crowns, where the role of the dragon is to war in heaven, a war that the dragon is losing, right? Has lost, in fact. This beast makes war on the earth. Comes up out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, like a leopard, like a bear, with a mouth like a lion. That ought to call to mind recent weeks, right? Remember Daniel's vision. Daniel has a vision of successive empires, a lion with wings, a leopard that's winged, a bear that's raised up more on one side of the other. Here we have a beast with attributes of exactly those beasts that Daniel has described. Like with the dragon, this seems to be not just an individual, but an empire, right? This is a force. Whether we say this is a particular empire or whether it is all the empires opposed to God across time, however you want to read that, it is an empire with all the attributes of the wicked empires described in the visions of Daniel. It is all-encompassing. Whatever is bad, whatever's opposed to God in all the empires throughout time, we see that being characterized in the beast here. Some of these parallels to Daniel are just absolutely unambiguous. So I've color-coded them because they're just too many to match otherwise. So here's Revelation on the top. Here's Daniel 7 on the bottom. The beast is given a mouth to utter haughty and blasphemous words. The little horn in Daniel 7 has a mouth speaking great things. Both of them prevail for 42 months. Both of them make blasphemies against God. Both of them make war against the saints and prevail against them. Right? There's a totally unambiguous parallel here back to the events of Daniel chapter 7 in the way the beast is described here. We're on the subject of parity. Here's another one. Authority is given to the beast over every tribe and people and language and nation. Already we have seen this framing, every tribe, tongue, nation, people, in those following the Lamb and worshiping him. Right? We've seen that earlier in the book of Revelation. There's again a callback here. And yet, in all that the beast does, in all its war on the saints, all its authority is nonetheless limited, right? All authority was given to it, every tribe and tongue and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship it, everyone except, right? Everyone whose name was not written before the foundation of the earth in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. I read this and thought of Ephesians chapter 1, right? Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who's blessed us in Christ with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places, even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world. Before anything else begins, already this is the Father's plan, already it is established. The beast rages, but only within the sphere of permissions that he's been set. The beast of Revelation is our most unambiguous figure that we would identify as Antichrist. So who is it? I'm not going to tell you because we have 5 minutes left today. Come back next time. And I will not tell you then either because I don't know who it is. But our next week, 2 weeks, we will take a session entirely on how the church has seen and understood the Antichrist. So come back for that, and we'll give a not answer to it then that I can't give right now, okay? Real quick as we're closing out, don't pack up for me yet. Give me just a minute. We come to an interlude in the middle, right? And again, I want you to see the strong theme of Revelation. Here is the call for the endurance of the saints, right? Yes, you will go into captivity. Yes, you will be slain. Endure through it, right? These things are planned by God as well. Nonetheless, endure through them. Finally, we have the third member of our unholy trinity, the beast from the land coming up out of the earth. Remember we said, it's been a long time since we said this, but back in like March, we said that every time you see the word the earth in Revelation, it might also be translated the land. Right? The land being a reference to the land of Israel, the land of the people of God. Some have looked at this and have associated the prophet here with the Jewish people or with the people of Israel and have said this is a false prophet or a false movement, however you want to read it, coming up out of Israel. I don't know if that's true or not. Again, it's an ambiguous phrase, right? It might not be an intended reading there, but that is one you sometimes see. If the beast is a parody, if the first beast is a parody, everything about this one is fake. He looks fake. He looks like a lamb. He's not. He's a dragon inside, right? He pretends to have authority, right? No more are the prophets of Baal going to be overcome by Elijah challenging them to call down fire. He's going to call down fire from heaven and convince everyone on the earth to worship the beast. He has a false breath, right? So this word breath, pneuma, is also sometimes used as a word for spirit. And so he sends out a breath like a spirit and goes into this image and causes the image to speak, right? This false image of the beast to move and speak in some kind of miraculous sign to cause people to worship the image of the beast. By the way, if we are reading about a false image that everybody is being called to bow down to and worship, that's a different chapter of Daniel, right? That's one we skipped over in our trip through it, but definitely John wants you to be thinking about that when you hit here. Think of Nebuchadnezzar's giant statue of gold. Does anybody remember the height of the statue of gold? 90 feet, but of course Daniel doesn't measure it in feet. Cubits, right? Measure in cubits. How many cubits is it? That's a really good guess. 60. Right? Interesting that we have 6s recurring here as we come back into this passage. He gives this false mark. We've talked about that already. Could this be literally a physical mark? It could. In our own time, one of the political controversies of the last 2 years has been what they call debanking, right? Where banks, because of some political position or another, refuse to carry you. Could that be what's happening here? It could. This is not a new idea, right? If you look at, and here's one of the earliest examples. I have a little scrap of paper here. This is called the libellus, right? The libellus was the evidence in the 200s that you were an approved member of a good religion in the Roman Empire. You were not one of these radical outsiders like the Christians who refused to worship the emperor. You were a good and approved person. You'd burned your little pinch of salt for the emperor to show that you performed proper worship there. You could worship your own gods, right? Long as you included him as well. And when you did that, when you proved your loyalty there, you got not a physical mark, but you got a little document you could carry around with you that said, I'm a good and proper member of the empire, please don't kill me, right? One of the big controversies of the church in the 200s was, what do you do with people who get this document, Christians who get this document, and then when persecution ends, they come back and they say, hey, listen, I'd really like to come back to church now, right? I was wrong, let me come back in. How do you deal with people who've burned their pinch of salt to the emperor and have gotten their little document to stand approved, right? All through the history of the church, we've had this problem of, what do you do with people who take the mark, right? We see an echoing of that here. We can see that perhaps in some more specific way future on. Perhaps just, again, an idea of this notion of parodying the mark of God, of the authority of the beast, that's great but still limited to this earthly sphere. The exclusion of the world, the idolatry of the world, right? Again, an echoing of a challenge the church has faced down through the ages. To fit in, to deny our exclusivity, to just get along and be part of the system and not try to buck it. And then finally, we end with, this calls for wisdom. Let he who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. And that number means something I'm not going to tell you about right now. We have a missionary visit next week. In 2 weeks, we will be back, and we will take a week all on how we might try to understand some of the details of the beast that we see here and his number. And I will see you then. Have a great week.